The dust from her father's boots scattered across the church floor as he dragged Juniper Dawson toward the altar, her white satin dress catching on the rough wooden pews while she clawed at his iron grip. The man waiting at the front, Marcus Thornhill, smiled with all the warmth of a rattlesnake, his oiled hair gleaming in the afternoon light streaming through the dusty windows of Fort Stockton's only church. It was June 1878, and the Texas heat made the small building feel like an oven. But the coldness in Juniper's chest had nothing to do with temperature. Her father's weathered face was set in stone, his jaw clenched as he hauled his 22-year-old daughter forward despite her protests, despite her tears, despite everything she had begged him to understand over the past 3 weeks since he had arranged this marriage without her consent. "Please," she whispered again, her voice breaking. "Father, please do not do this to me." "Quiet, girl," Thomas Dawson hissed, his fingers digging into her upper arm hard enough to bruise. "Thornhill owns half the cattle in this territory, and this marriage will save our ranch. You will do your duty." Juniper's emerald eyes swept the crowd of witnesses, searching desperately for someone, anyone who might help her. The townspeople sat in uncomfortable silence, their faces a mixture of pity and avoidance. They all knew Marcus Thornhill's reputation. They all knew about the young wife he had buried 3 years ago, the one who had died under mysterious circumstances that the sheriff never quite investigated thoroughly enough. They all knew, and yet here they sat, watching another lamb being led to slaughter because Thornhill's money spoke louder than conscience in Fort Stockton. The Reverend, a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his sweating nose, cleared his throat nervously as Thomas dragged Juniper the final few feet to the altar. Marcus reached out with his pale, soft hands, hands that had never done an honest day's work, and Juniper jerked backward with such force that her father nearly lost his grip. "Now, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice sickeningly sweet, "there is no need for all this fuss. We are going to be very happy together, you and I." "I would rather die," Juniper spat, and she meant every word. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its careful arrangement, wild curls framing her face as she twisted in her father's grasp. "I will never be your wife. Never." Marcus's smile faltered, and something dark flickered behind his pale blue eyes. "You will learn your place soon enough." The Reverend opened his Bible with shaking hands. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The church doors exploded open with a crash that made everyone jump. Sunlight flooded the dim interior, silhouetting a tall figure in the doorway. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the figure stepped forward and Juniper's heart stuttered in her chest. Quentin Xavier walked into that church like vengeance itself, his spurs jingling with each purposeful stride. He was 25 years old, lean and hard from years of working cattle drives and living rough, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of storm clouds. His weathered duster coat swung around his legs, and his right hand rested casually on the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. Juniper had known Quentin since they were children, had grown up racing horses with him across the open range, had shared her dreams with him under the vast Texas sky. She had not seen him in 4 months, not since he had left on a cattle drive north to Kansas. "Step away from her," Quentin said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the church. Thomas Dawson's face turned purple. "You have no business here, Xavier. Get out before I have you thrown out." "I said step away from her." Quentin's hand moved slightly on his gun, not drawing it, just a reminder that it was there. "This wedding is not happening." Marcus Thornhill's face twisted with rage. "Who do you think you are? She is promised to me." "Her father gave his word." "Her father does not own her," Quentin replied, his eyes never leaving Juniper's face. Even from across the church, she could see the intensity in his gaze, could feel the connection that had always existed between them crackling to life again. And she does not want this marriage. What she wants is irrelevant, Thomas growled. I am her father, and I decide what is best for her. Quentin finally tore his eyes away from Juniper to look at Thomas, and the contempt in his expression made the older man take an involuntary step backward. You are selling your daughter to save your failing ranch. That is not being a father. That is being a coward. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Thomas's face went from purple to nearly white with fury. He released Juniper's arm and took a step toward Quentin, but Marcus held up a hand to stop him. Enough of this. Marcus's voice had lost all pretense of sweetness now. Sheriff, remove this man. The sheriff, a portly man named Henderson who was firmly in Thornhill's pocket, stood up from his pew and rested his hand on his own gun. You heard Mr. Thornhill. Get out, Xavier, or I will arrest you for disturbing the peace. Quentin's jaw tightened, but he did not move. His eyes found Juniper's again, and in that moment, she saw everything he was not saying. She saw years of friendship and something deeper, something neither of them had ever quite put into words. She saw a promise that he would not leave her to this fate. Juniper, he said softly, do you want to marry Marcus Thornhill? Her father grabbed her arm again. She does not have to answer that. Yes, she does, Quentin said, his voice hardening. Because if she says she wants this marriage, I will walk out of here right now and never bother her again. But if she says no, I am taking her with me. You cannot just take her, the Reverend squeaked. That would be kidnapping. It is only kidnapping if she does not want to go. Quentin took another step closer, his hand still resting on his gun. The tension in the church was thick enough to choke on. Juniper, tell me what you want. She looked at her father, at the man who had raised her after her mother died, who had taught her to ride and to rope and to love this harsh, beautiful land. She looked at the fear in his eyes, the desperation that had driven him to this terrible decision. Then she looked at Marcus Thornhill, at the cruel curve of his mouth and the promise of misery in his cold stare. Finally, she looked at Quentin, at the man who had ridden back into Fort Stockton just in time, who was willing to risk everything to give her a choice. I do not want this marriage, she said clearly, her voice ringing through the church. I will never marry Marcus Thornhill. Marcus moved fast for a soft man, his hand diving into his jacket and emerging with a small pistol. But Quentin was faster. His Colt cleared leather in a blur, and the single shot echoed like thunder in the confined space. The pistol flew from Marcus's hand, blood spraying from his fingers where the bullet had grazed them. Women screamed. Men dove for cover. Marcus howled in pain and rage, clutching his injured hand to his chest. The next one goes through your heart, Quentin said calmly, his gun now trained steady on Marcus's chest. Juniper, come here. She did not hesitate. She yanked her arm free from her father's shocked grip and ran, her wedding dress rustling and dragging through the dust as she crossed the church. When she reached Quentin's side, he shifted to put himself between her and the rest of the room, his gun never wavering. You cannot do this, Thomas found his voice at last, shaking with fury and fear. She is my daughter. Everything I did was to protect her, to protect our family. By selling her to a man who killed his first wife, Quentin's words fell like stones into still water. Everyone in this town knows what Thornhill is. You just chose to ignore it because you needed his money. My wife's death was an accident, Marcus snarled through his pain. You have no proof of anything else. Then why did Dr. Matthews tell my father that she had bruises all over her body? Juniper spoke up, her voice stronger now that she stood beside Quentin. Why did she tell the saloon keeper's wife that she was afraid of you, 2 days before she fell down those stairs? The murmurs in the church grew louder. Marcus's face went pale, then red. Lies. All lies. Sheriff Henderson, Thomas tried desperately. Are you going to let this outlaw shoot a respected citizen and kidnap my daughter? The sheriff looked between Quentin's steady gun and the angry crowd that was starting to whisper among themselves. The shooting of an unarmed man, even in defense of another, was a complicated thing. But the revelation about Marcus's first wife had shifted something in the room. People were remembering things they had tried to forget, questions they had been too afraid to ask. Seems to me, Sheriff Henderson said slowly, clearly calculating which side would be safer to land on, that Mr. Thornhill drew first. And as for Miss Dawson, she is of age and said clear as day she does not want this marriage. I do not see any crime here. No crime, Thomas's voice broke. He is stealing my daughter. I am leaving, Juniper said firmly, turning to face her father. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice did not shake. I am leaving because you would rather keep your ranch than keep me safe. I am leaving because you stopped being my father the moment you promised me to that monster. And I am leaving because Quentin gave me a choice when you would not. Thomas seemed to age a decade in that moment, his shoulders slumping. The ranch, Juniper. Without Thornhill's money, we will lose everything. Then lose it, she said quietly. Some prices are too high to pay. Quentin backed toward the door, keeping his gun trained on the room, keeping Juniper shielded behind him. When they reached the entrance, he finally holstered his weapon and grabbed her hand. Together, they ran into the blazing Texas sunshine, leaving chaos and shouting behind them. Quentin's horse, a magnificent bay stallion named Ranger, waited at the hitching post along with a smaller sorrel mare. He practically threw Juniper onto the mare's back, wedding dress and all, before swinging into his own saddle. They kicked their horses into a gallop and thundered out of Fort Stockton, leaving nothing but dust and shattered expectations in their wake. They rode hard for an hour, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the town. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Juniper's elaborate wedding dress was wholly impractical for riding, but she did not care. She leaned forward over the mare's neck and let the wind whip through her hair. Let the rhythm of hoofbeats drum out the memory of that church, that altar, those cold hands reaching for her. Finally, Quentin pulled up near a small creek lined with cottonwood trees, one of the few green places in this harsh landscape. They dismounted, and Juniper's legs nearly gave out after the hard ride. Quentin caught her elbow, steadying her. Are you all right? He asked, his storm-gray eyes searching her face with concern. She started laughing, great gulping laughs that bordered on hysteria. Am I all right? I was nearly married to a murderer, my father betrayed me, and I just ran away from my own wedding. I do not think all right quite covers it. Quentin's serious expression cracked into a grin. Fair point. Then his smile faded and he reached up to gently brush a tear from her cheek. I am sorry I did not get back sooner, if I had known what your father was planning. How did you know? Juniper asked. The wedding was supposed to be a secret until this week. Your friend Sarah got word to me in San Antonio. She rode out to find the cattle drive crew and track me down. When she told me what was happening, I rode straight through for 3 days to get here. He shook his head. I nearly did not make it in time. Juniper's heart clenched at the thought of how close she had come to a different fate. Thank you, she whispered. Quentin, I do not know what I would have done if you had not come. You would have found a way, he said with certainty. You are the strongest person I know, Juniper Dawson. You always have been. She looked at him then, really looked at him. 4 months ago, when he had left for the cattle drive, she had convinced herself that what she felt for Quentin was just friendship, just the comfortable affection of two people who had grown up together. But standing here now, seeing the exhaustion on his face from 3 days of hard riding, seeing the determination in his eyes and the gentleness in his touch, she could not lie to herself any more. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Quentin took a deep breath. "I have money saved from the cattle drive. Enough to get us somewhere far from Fort Stockton, somewhere your father and Thornhill cannot reach you. I was thinking New Mexico territory, maybe Santa Fe. I have a friend there who runs a ranch, says he could always use another hand. We could start over." "We?" Juniper's heart was pounding now. He looked down at their hands, somehow intertwined without either of them noticing. "If you want. I know I just shot up your wedding and dragged you out of town, and maybe you have no interest in sticking with me after all this settles down. But Juniper, I have to tell you something, and I should have said it years ago." He raised his eyes to hers, and she saw vulnerability there, raw and honest. "I love you. I have loved you since we were 16 years old and you beat me in that horse race at the county fair. I left for that cattle drive trying to earn enough money to buy my own land, thinking maybe if I had something to offer, I could finally tell you how I felt. Then I heard you were being forced to marry Thornhill, and I realized that all the money and land in the world did not matter if I lost you." Tears spilled down Juniper's cheeks, but she was smiling. "You impossible man. Do you know how long I have waited to hear you say that?" His eyes widened. "You mean?" Instead of answering with words, she grabbed the front of his dusty shirt and pulled him down into a kiss. It was not gentle or tentative. It was fierce and desperate, full of years of unspoken feelings and the terror of nearly losing each other. Quentin's arms came around her, crushing her against him, and for a long moment, nothing else existed except the two of them and the promise of what could be. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes to everything," Juniper said. "Yes, I love you. Yes, I want to go to New Mexico with you. Yes, I want to start over and build a life together. Yes to all of it." He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. When he pulled back, his expression turned practical. "We need to keep moving. Your father might come after us, or Thornhill might hire men to track us down." Juniper looked down at her ruined wedding dress with distaste. "I need to get out of this thing. Do you have any spare clothes?" Quentin dug through his saddlebags and produced a worn shirt and a pair of trousers. "They will be too big, but better than trying to ride in that dress." She took the clothes and disappeared behind a cottonwood tree to change. The simple act of removing the wedding dress felt like shedding a skin, leaving behind the life her father had tried to force on her. When she emerged in Quentin's oversized clothes, her hair braided simply down her back, she felt more like herself than she had in weeks. "Much better," Quentin said approvingly. Then he sobered. "We have a long road ahead of us, Juniper. It will not be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," she replied, taking his hand, "but we will face it together." They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, keeping to less traveled paths and avoiding any towns where word of the disrupted wedding might have spread. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, they made camp in a sheltered canyon. Quentin built a small fire while Juniper unsaddled the horses and rubbed them down with handfuls of grass. They shared jerky and hardtack from Quentin's supplies, and it was the best meal Juniper had ever tasted because it was eaten in freedom. As the stars came out, impossibly bright in the clear desert sky, they sat close together by the fire. "Tell me about the cattle drive," Juniper said, leaning her head on Quentin's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her and began to talk, his voice low and warm in the darkness. He told her about the long days pushing cattle across the plains, the river crossings that tested every cowboy's courage, the nights sleeping under stars just like these. He told her about the stampede that had nearly killed 3 men, the storm that had scattered the herd for 2 days, the satisfaction of finally reaching the railhead in Kansas and getting paid for months of brutal work. "I kept thinking about you the whole time," he admitted. "Every night, I would look up at the stars and wonder if you were looking at the same sky. I would imagine coming home and finally telling you how I felt. Imagine your face when I asked you to marry me properly, not in some rushed escape, but with flowers and a ring and all the time in the world for you to decide." Juniper lifted her head to look at him. "I do not need flowers or a ring, Quentin. I just need you. You will have both anyway," he promised. "When we get to Santa Fe and I am working again, I am going to buy you the prettiest ring I can find, and I am going to ask you proper the way you deserve." She kissed him softly. "I will say yes then too." They talked long into the night, making plans and sharing dreams. They would go to Santa Fe and work hard to save money. Quentin would work his friend's ranch, and Juniper, who was skilled with horses, could help train and sell them. Eventually, they would buy their own land, build their own home. They would create the life they both wanted, free from the expectations and failures of their families. "You think your father will ever forgive us?" Quentin asked quietly. Juniper was silent for a long moment. "I do not know," she finally said. "He made his choice and I made mine. Maybe someday he will understand that keeping me safe should have mattered more than keeping the ranch. But even if he does not, I cannot regret this." "Neither can I," Quentin said fiercely, pulling her closer. They took turns keeping watch through the night, though Juniper suspected Quentin barely slept even during his rest periods. She woke before dawn to find him sitting by the dying fire, his rifle across his knees, staring out at the lightening horizon. "Any trouble?" she asked, sitting up. He turned to her with a soft smile. "Nothing but a coyote passing through and my own thoughts." They broke camp quickly and rode on, heading west toward New Mexico territory. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills, and then to more dramatic terrain. They passed through small settlements where nobody knew them, where they could buy supplies without attracting attention. 3 days into their journey, they stopped in a tiny town called Esperanza Wells to replenish their food and rest the horses. It was barely more than a wide spot in the road, with a general store, a saloon, and a scattering of adobe buildings baking in the sun. While Quentin saw to the horses, Juniper went into the store to buy supplies. The elderly woman behind the counter gave her a knowing look as she tallied up the beans, coffee, and dried meat. "You two running from something, or running to something?" she asked mildly. Juniper was startled by the direct question. "What makes you think we are running at all?" the woman chuckled. "Honey, I have been alive 63 years and running this store for 40 of them. I can spot young lovers on the run from a mile away. The question is whether you are escaping trouble or causing it." Juniper considered lying but found she did not have the energy for it. "Escaping," she said simply. "My father tried to force me into a marriage I did not want. Quentin helped me leave." The old woman's expression softened. "Good for him, and good for you for having the courage to go." She pushed an extra packet of coffee beans across the counter. "On the house. You will need your strength for the road ahead." "Thank you," Juniper said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "One more thing," the woman said as Juniper gathered her purchases. "If anyone comes through asking about a young couple heading west, I will tell them you went north toward Colorado. Consider it my contribution to true love." Juniper felt tears prick her eyes. "I do not know how to thank you." "Live a good life, honey. That is thanks enough." When Juniper told Quentin about the exchange, he smiled. "There are still good people in the world," he said. "I am glad you found one of them." They pushed on, making good time now that they felt more confident they were not being immediately pursued. The nights were cool, the days hot, and every mile took them further from Fort Stockton and closer to their new life. They talked endlessly as they rode, learning things about each other they had never known despite their years of friendship. Juniper discovered that Quentin had taught himself to read as a child using old newspapers, and that he had a secret love of poetry. Quentin learned that Juniper had once dreamed of being a teacher, but had given up that dream when her mother died and she was needed on the ranch. "Maybe you still could," Quentin suggested one evening as they made camp. "In Santa Fe, I mean. They have a real school there." Juniper looked at him in surprise. "Do you really think so? Why not? You are smart, you read better than most people, and you love learning. Seems to me you would make a fine teacher." The idea planted itself in her heart like a seed. Maybe it was not too late for dreams after all. 2 weeks into their journey, they crossed into New Mexico territory. The landscape here was different, more dramatic, with red rock formations jutting up against impossibly blue skies. They followed the trail that would eventually lead them to Santa Fe, but they were in no hurry now. The initial fear of pursuit had faded, and they found themselves simply enjoying the journey and each other's company. One afternoon, they stopped to water the horses at a small spring surrounded by pine trees, a surprising oasis in the dry land. While the horses drank, Quentin pulled Juniper away from the water's edge to a flat rock overlooking the valley below. "I know I said I would wait until Santa Fe," he began, suddenly nervous in a way she had never seen him before, "but I cannot wait any longer." He dropped to one knee and Juniper's breath caught in her throat. From his pocket he pulled out a small ring, clearly old, with a simple design of silver leaves intertwined. "This was my mother's," Quentin said quietly. "The only thing I have left of her. I know it is not fancy, and I know we are standing in the middle of nowhere instead of somewhere romantic, but Juniper Dawson, I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me?" Juniper dropped to her knees in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "Yes," she said through happy tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit perfectly as if it had always been meant for her. Then he kissed her, and the world fell away. There was no past, no angry father or threatening suitor, no lost ranches or ruined plans. There was only this moment, this man, and the future stretching out before them like the wide open land. They reached Santa Fe 3 days later, and the town took Juniper's breath away. It was unlike anything she had seen before, a blend of Spanish and Native American influences with adobe buildings the color of the earth itself. Mountains rose in the distance, and the air had a clarity that made everything seem sharper, more real. Quentin's friend, a rancher named Miguel Santos, welcomed them warmly and immediately offered Quentin the job he had mentioned. He also offered them the use of a small casita on his property until they could afford a place of their own. It was a single room with a dirt floor and a fireplace, but to Juniper, it looked like a palace because it was theirs. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the town's church, with Miguel and his wife Rosa standing as witnesses. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding Thomas Dawson had planned, and it was perfect. Juniper wore a simple blue dress Rosa had helped her make, and Quentin wore his best shirt, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin kissed her like it was the first time and the last time all at once, and Juniper knew she had made the right choice. Life in Santa Fe was not easy, but it was good. Quentin worked long days on Miguel's ranch, learning the unique challenges of raising cattle in this different terrain. Juniper, true to her skill with horses, began training Miguel's stock and soon gained a reputation in the area. People started bringing their difficult horses to her, and she discovered she had a gift for understanding what animals needed. In the evenings, they would return to their little casita, exhausted but happy. They would make simple meals together and talk about their days. Sometimes they would walk into town, and Juniper would look longingly at the schoolhouse. Finally, Quentin encouraged her to approach the schoolmaster, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Flores, who was struggling to teach 40 children of varying ages by himself. To Juniper's amazement, Mr. Flores was thrilled at the prospect of help. He could not pay her much, but he could offer her a few hours a week teaching the youngest children their letters. Juniper accepted immediately and soon found herself loving every moment of it. The children adored her and their parents appreciated her patience and skill. A year passed, then another. Quentin and Juniper saved every penny they could, living frugally but contentedly. They bought their own small piece of land on the outskirts of Santa Fe, 10 acres with a stream running through it and a view of the mountains. Together, they built a house, not large but solid, with 2 rooms and a porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. In the spring of 1881, 3 years after their escape from Fort Stockton, Juniper discovered she was pregnant. She told Quentin one evening on that porch, watching the light fade from the sky, and the joy on his face made her heart overflow. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Are you ready?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "With you, I am ready for anything." Their son was born that December, healthy and loud, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Thomas, after Juniper's father, a gesture of forgiveness for wounds that had not fully healed, but had at least begun to scar over. Holding her baby in her arms, Juniper thought about the girl she had been 3 years ago, being dragged down that church aisle against her will. She thought about how close she had come to a completely different life, a nightmare instead of this dream. And she thought about the single gunshot that had changed everything, the moment when Quentin Xavier had proven that love was worth fighting for. "What are you thinking about?" Quentin asked, sitting beside her on the bed, gazing down at their son with wonder. "That I am grateful," Juniper said simply, "for you, for that day in the church, for every choice that brought us here." He kissed her forehead gently. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." As the years went on, their family grew. 2 years after Thomas came a daughter they named Rosalind, with golden hair that caught the sunlight like wheat. Then another son, James, who was quiet and thoughtful where his older brother was boisterous. Each child was raised with love and the knowledge that they were wanted, treasured, free to choose their own paths. Quentin's work and reputation grew until he became Miguel's partner in the ranch. Juniper eventually became a full-time teacher, beloved by generations of children. Their small house grew into a larger one, with rooms for all the children and that porch where Quentin and Juniper still sat every evening they could, watching the sun set over the mountains and marveling at the life they had built. In 1888, 10 years after their escape from Fort Stockton, a letter arrived. Juniper recognized her father's handwriting on the envelope, and her hands shook as she opened it. Thomas Dawson wrote that he had lost the ranch years ago, just as Juniper had predicted. He wrote that Marcus Thornhill had drunk himself to death, bitter and alone, his reputation destroyed after it came out that he had indeed killed his first wife. But mostly, Thomas wrote that he was sorry. He was sorry for trying to force the marriage. He was sorry for choosing money over his daughter's safety. He was sorry for losing her. The letter ended with a simple request. Could he meet his grandchildren? Juniper sat on the porch steps for a long time, the letter in her lap, tears streaming down her face. Quentin found her there and read the letter silently over her shoulder. "What do you want to do?" he asked gently. "I do not know," she admitted. "Part of me is still so angry with him, but part of me remembers the father he was before my mother died, before fear and desperation changed him." "You do not have to decide right now," Quentin said. "But whatever you decide, I will support you." In the end, Juniper wrote back. It was not an immediate forgiveness, but it was a beginning. She told her father about their life in Santa Fe, about the children, about the happiness she had found. She told him that someday, when she was ready, he could visit. But she made it clear that the life she had built was her own, not dependent on his approval or his presence. Thomas wrote back immediately, grateful and humble. Over the next year, their correspondence continued, tentative at first but gradually warming. Finally, in the summer of 1889, Thomas Dawson traveled to Santa Fe. He was older, grayer, diminished by time and regret, but there was genuine joy in his eyes when he met his grandchildren. "You did well for yourself," he told Juniper on that same porch, watching Quentin play with the children in the yard. "Better than I ever could have imagined." "I did well because I chose my own path," Juniper said firmly, "because Quentin gave me the chance to choose." "I know," Thomas said quietly, "and I am grateful to him for that. I am grateful he was there when I failed you. It was not a complete reconciliation, but it was enough." Thomas visited several more times over the years, and while the relationship between father and daughter was never quite what it had been, they found a new understanding. He died in 1893, peacefully in his sleep during a visit, and Juniper grieved for the man he could have been as much as for the man he was. Through it all, Quentin remained her anchor, her partner, her love. They had their struggles, as all couples do. There were lean years when the cattle prices dropped, and they worried about money. There were health scares and disappointments. There were arguments and misunderstandings. But underlying everything was the foundation they had built together, the absolute certainty that they had chosen each other and would continue choosing each other every single day. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, Quentin took Juniper back to the spring where he had proposed. The children were old enough now to be left with friends, and they made the journey as they had so many times before, on horseback under the wide New Mexico sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Quentin asked as they sat by the water. "Running away with me, everything you left behind." Juniper looked at this man who had saved her, who had loved her, who had built a life with her brick by brick and year by year. She thought about their children, their home, their friends, the school where she taught and the ranch where he worked. She thought about the freedom to make her own choices and the joy of waking up every morning next to her best friend. "Not for a single second," she said, and kissed him in the afternoon sunlight. They grew old together, as they had always planned. They watched their children marry and have children of their own. They celebrated victories and weathered losses. They became fixtures in Santa Fe, the couple with the romantic story, the cowboy who had stopped a wedding with a single shot and ridden off with his true love. In 1921, Quentin died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. Juniper held his hand as he passed, and though her heart broke, she was grateful for 43 years of marriage, grateful for a lifetime of love. She lived another 7 years after that, surrounded by children and grandchildren, teaching until the very end because it brought her joy. When Juniper Dawson Xavier died in 1928 at the age of 72, she was buried next to Quentin on their land, overlooking the mountains they had both loved. On her headstone, their children inscribed a simple epitaph. She chose love. It was a choice that echoed through generations. Their children told the story to their children, who told it to theirs. The tale grew and shifted over time, becoming legend, but the heart of it remained true. A young woman being forced to marry against her will. A cowboy who loved her enough to risk everything. A single gunshot that changed 2 lives forever. And a love that built something lasting, something real, something that proved that courage and choice and devotion could create a happiness worth fighting for. The little house they had built still stands, now over a century old, maintained by descendants who remember where they came from. And if you sit on that porch in the evening, watching the sun set over the New Mexico mountains, you can almost feel them there still. Quentin and Juniper, together as they always were, as they always would be, bound by a choice made in a dusty Texas church, and carried forward through every day of their long, beautiful lives together. Their story was not just about escape or rescue. It was about partnership, about 2 people choosing to build something together from nothing. It was about forgiveness and growth, about making peace with the past while embracing the future. It was about the courage it takes to defy expectations and the strength required to create your own happiness. In the end, that single shot Quentin fired in Fort Stockton's church did more than just stop a wedding. It started a life, a real life built on love and respect, and the simple, radical act of letting someone choose their own destiny. And that, more than anything, is why the story endured, passed down through generations as proof that sometimes, when everything seems lost, love can save the day after all.